Hello everyone, and welcome to Word on the Street. My name is Serilda Summers-McGee, and I'm the founder and CEO of Workplace Change, which is a human resources, diversity, equity, and inclusion integration firm. Today is a special Word on the Street. We have a guest joining us, our first guest ever on Word on the Street, and it's Rene Gonzalez. Rene is running for city commissioner. And he's running at a time that is so important in the city of Portland for the community at large, for the workforce, for the workplace, for companies, for civilization, right? He is stepping into the fray and saying, I want to be city commissioner. And so I wanted to bring him here to talk about what's on his mind, what's his vision, what's his plan, and ask him some questions that are important to you, important to me, important to the greater population. All right, so welcome, Rene.
Thank you so much for having me.
Happy that you're here with us.
I'm excited.
So my first question for you is, why do you want to be city commissioner? I mean, at a time in the world where being an elected official, being an executive, being on the front of newspapers, you know, gets a lot of eyes, gets a lot of criticism. Why now? Why do you want to lead now in this moment?
Yeah, well, our city's hurting. You know, this is the only city my children have ever known. They're born and raised here, 3 of them. I've got 2 sides to my family, but one of them goes back 5 generations in this city. Okay. And I have a deep love for it. I appreciate both the goods and some of the sticky parts of our history. Yeah. But this is something worth fighting for. And it's really struggling right now in terms of core livability. And was either, put up or do something to fix it. And that's why I'm stepping in.
Right on. Well, I mean, we run an HR firm, right? So I'm going to ask you a super HR question. Okay. And that is, how has your career, your background prepared you to be successful as a city commissioner in Portland?
Yeah, well, really 2 hats when you're talking about public service as a city commissioner. First of all, private sector. I've been in the private sector my entire professional career, have done major transactions at a major law firm, then in-house in a corporate strategy and a corporate management role where you're overseeing big budgets, you're building a common vision and measuring against it and driving performance against it. Right. I think all of those experiences lend themselves really well to overseeing bureaus in the city of Portland. And as your audience likely knows, under our current form of government, city commissioner oversees a number of bureaus. These are substantial budgets. These are substantial management obligations and responsibilities. And we have a tendency to elect advocates. Yeah. I think having some actual experience in managing budgets, managing teams is crucially important in our current form of government. I'm also a small business owner. The last 10 years I've owned my own shop, first a law firm and then a little technology company underneath it. Okay. So real skin in the game in terms of the experience of business owners in the city, what it takes to survive this town through all the ups and downs. Yeah. And as a parent and just a person who's lived their entire adult life here, there's a level of skin in the game. The other side is my community involvement over the years. So, I don't think, I think sometimes folks in the private sector go in with a little bit of arrogance into
taking it. Right?
You lived it, right? It's like, you think because you figured out in the private sector that will automatically carry over into government or into other public service. And throughout my professional career, I've been super engaged in community activities, Portland Children's Museum Board, Library Foundation Board, built the largest youth soccer club in the state. And that gives you different angles, right? Yeah. So you're not just a leader as a commissioner. You have to collaborate. You have to find common ground. You have to get to 3 votes. And I think, and Peter Drucker's old business writer, he often commented that the private sector has as much to learn from some of our non-for-profit entities as the nonprofit entities have to learn from the private sector. And his point was around collaboration. You can't just command everything in the nonprofit world and community service world. You've got to build consensus. You've got to collaborate. And so I think both those sort of experiences, that extensive private sector background, managing all from small to very big, $1 billion company. I led strategy for a year there. See big picture, what it takes to manage at scale and the unique challenges there. I think that lends itself very well to city management of bureaus. On the other hand, the ability to collaborate, the ability to find common ground, both crucial. One last piece. the schools fights to reopen that I led statewide, as we were emerging from the pandemic, really tough public health issue, right? How do you safely reopen schools in the pandemic? This is as you're adjusting to new data as you go, and we learn more about the disease and what others are doing successfully. And we eventually were successful in lobbying the governor to mandate the reopening of public schools. But what we did is stay very focused on data. We stayed very focused on agreed upon facts and spent the time and the energy and doing the work to find common ground. We did that in a bipartisan way with people from across the state. I think that's got to be a part of how we confront some of these more difficult challenges that I think we're going to talk about that the city's facing, that we really focus on the facts and we put in the time to find common ground on agreed upon facts. That doesn't mean we're going to agree upon everything, but we've got to come together on the more difficult issues and not just scream from the mountaintop. We've got to find the way to, find common understanding of the facts.
Well, I'm gonna get you to some tangibles here pretty soon. I want to hear what you plan to actually do. People can hold you accountable for if you are elected into this role, where they want to see progress made on the vision, the ideas, the specifics you have about getting the city to a different place, helping to get the city to a different place. It's not just you alone, just like it's not just the mayor alone or any one commissioner. So let's talk about your leadership strategy, philosophy, and approach, right? So as a city commissioner, you run a portfolio of bureaus, right? Now, the bureau directors, they run it day to day, but they serve at the pleasure of elected officials. You can go into the details on their operations, and when there is a fallout in a bureau, it rolls up to the commissioner in charge of that bureau. What is your leadership management style and philosophy, and what can the workforce who will serve under you expect from you?
Yeah, well, I been in the trenches over a number of years in a number of contexts. I really look at it from two main angles. One, there is an element of building a unified vision and as a team collaborate, working towards a common goal, a common vision, and managing towards that, right? That. And so you define where we're going and you measure against it, and you talk about it every day, and you track that every day. And that's the element that's a little bit top down. That vision does have to be built, though, with every stakeholder, including, the folks at the front end. But to come up with a common vision, the common goals, and that you kind of push down. The other side, though, is how do you pull the data and the information and the real life experiences of those on the ground, right? And that's always the management challenge when you start with top down, right? Is how do you pull this up? How do you percolate that? And that is an everyday thing. Sometimes that's skip level interviews, sometimes that's going out and seeing, not just listening to what you hear in a city council meeting, but going seeing on the ground, the real life, what it's like for the front end worker in your bureaus, experiencing that in some way, like what they see from their seat. And that just gives you a different color. That gives you things that you don't see in a strategy session sometimes, or in an office building in kind of the abstract. You've got to see it on the ground level too. The last is that, there are these other stakeholders, these other constituents. In the private sector, it's your customer, right? That's such a crucial point apart. And then sometimes you have crucial vendors that are really, really important. Well, in the city, it's continuous connection with people on the street. And I mean that broadly speaking, like our voting base, our everyday citizens, and this highly diverse that is that has very different perspectives on these different challenges, but continuous commitment to engaging with them and staying current on the trends, because I think sometimes you get stuck in City Hall, and just like in the corporate world, you get stuck in the boardroom, and you lose sight of what's shifting on the streets. And I think it's so important to stay out there and connected. So yes, you apply a framework, right? A sort of a real management framework, but you've got to find ways to supplement that process with real life, tangible experiences from stakeholders.
Well, I mean, so yes, I get what you're saying. day one, let's say you're given the Water Bureau, the Fire Bureau, and the Office of Neighborhood Involvement, right? Or I think they may have a new title now, but the new ONI, right?
Right.
They don't do the same work. That body of work that they're responsible for, from budget to staffing to mission to outcomes to impact, fundamentally different. And you've got to learn all of those books of business kind of in short order. What's going to be your strategy for getting up to speed on what the functional purpose and impact of those bureaus are?
Yeah, well, I will take a piece that you take from the corporate world. You're going to have a 90-day plan, a 6-month plan, and a year plan, right? And part of that's explicitly to onboard yourself on all the stuff you don't know and that you don't know that you don't know, right?
That's right.
And it's so that is an explicit education on whatever bureau you get assigned.
And you're going to craft that. For yourself.
Well, I'll be a big part of it, but
Yeah.
you're going to talk to your, bureau chiefs and,
And they're going to help you craft it.
Exactly, because
Right
that's
on.
not you don't know what you don't know.
You don't know
right?
what you don't know.
And so you've got to work with your teammates and particularly that first level of support to help shape that,
That's right.
and that's drinking from the water hose.
It is.
Depends on which bureaus you get assigned. Some you'll hit the ground running a little bit more quickly than others. That's just the reality.
Yeah.
There's some stuff involved in, development services. If I ever got those bureaus,
Yeah.
they'll probably hit the ground a little bit faster than others. But there's going to be
And shout out to BDS.
Yeah.
I miss the BDS crew. But yeah, I totally understand where you're coming from. I want to pivot to a very specific, I want to kind of double click on one particular bureau. And I'm going to tell you why. So I want to talk about the police bureau because, there have been different initiatives that have happened, from defund the police initiatives to don't shoot was huge throughout Portland. There have been a lot of criticism, of the police division, the bureau at large. It's led to some hurt feelings across the board, from community members to police officers, and higher vacancy rates for police officers. Now, you are not going to be the police commissioner. That's the mayor's gig, right?
Yep.
But as an elected official, right, like as a city commissioner, you are a leader within the city enterprise, and what you say, how you treat them, how you engage, and your thoughts about them impacts the entire greater city area. From vacancies, right, recruitment initiatives to, the way in which policing happens throughout the area. So I want to hear your perspective, recognizing you are not the police commissioner, but you have an impact, and there are votes that have to happen in order for certain things to, budget to get approved and earmarked for police officers. What's your perspective on policing in the city of Portland, the police force, policing the community, and the different populations that are policed? Give me your perspective.
Yeah, so I'm going to start at a high level, and one of the drivers of why I'm running, right? So I truly see a crisis in livability in the city of Portland right now, and one or two on that list is crime. I mean, we are experiencing historic homicide rates in the city of Portland. In the Black community in particular, 47% of our victims are Black right now, in a population of roughly the population is 6%.
That's right.
And so all Portlanders are struggling with crime, but some of our most at risk are the most negatively impacted by that.
Right.
And you go down a notch. The wealthy can privatize police. They can hire private security. They fly to the suburbs. But our more marginalized groups, whether racial or economic, in either case, that's not so easy, right? You can't just you can't just privatize police. And so I start with the assumption that we are in a public safety crisis that needs to be addressed very directly.
Yeah.
And so what does that mean in policing? Well, they are, for better or worse, they are sort of the front end of the criminal justice system, right? They're where the rubber hits the road. And there are a lot of other pieces involved in the criminal justice system that impact policing. But at the end of the day, that's the first, that's the rubber hits the road.
Right.
And so I start with the assumption, I look at historic levels of staffing right now. We don't have enough police on the city, in the city of Portland.
And the city has been growing.
Exactly.
Right.
I mean, and by some counts, we're 300 to 400 police under what would be optimal. And I could go in the data if you want it, but it's like,
Right, I don't need to. I want to keep up here at the management, like the strategy, the philosophy.
Well, it's important to, agreed upon facts, or at least putting those on the table. And it's like, I work on the assumption we have a public safety crisis. We don't have enough police officers.
Okay.
Those are two starting points.
We have a public safety crisis. You highlighted that the Black community is disproportionately impacted by the crime that's happening throughout the city. I want to double click on that one.
Okay.
Because some people will hear, that Black people are the sources of the crime, right? That's not what you are saying.
I'm saying that 47% of the victims of homicide in the city of Portland are Black.
Right.
I mean, it's like
victims of
that is
crime.
The ones who are dying when there's a homicide in the city of Portland. 47% are Black right now.
Yeah.
And in a city where roughly 6% of the population is Black, disproportionately impacting the Black.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
It's so your point's really fair.
Yeah.
And I want to go on both sides though of a homicide, right?
Yes.
Because if the folks who talk about it in deep way, criminologists, they remind that there are two families destroyed anytime there's a homicide, right? There's the victim's family, and there's the person who commits the murder.
Yeah.
And it's like, and you're destroying two lives beyond the individuals that were that were involved. It has a ripple effect.
It does.
And sometimes a family is going to lose a father on both sides, right? And or a mother on both sides, and it is a tragedy every single homicide in the city of Portland. And so I focus on the victims, but policing again is where the rubber hits the road, but it's just one piece of what leads to a homicide. And I want to talk about some of the things they can do.
Let's unpack that. I would love to go deeper in this discussion on what is the solution for this trend line that is this negative trend line, this harmful trend line that is directly impacting the Black community more so than any other community in the city of Portland. Yeah. What can we do to interrupt this trend line?
To prevent that.
To prevent these outcomes. That's exactly right.
If you got me, there's a lot of the defund police movement that I firmly disagree with, and we'll talk about some of that in a second, what I disagree with. Right on. But I'll tell you what I agree with them on, right? Functioning schools, community organizations, spiritual organizations, and the arts, right? Yeah. These are giving people a life, right? It is so fundamental to crime prevention. It's fundamental to creating a great society. Yeah. And so to me, we've known this a long time.
We have.
And it's like you have functioning public schools, you have spiritual outlets for those that are so inclined. Right. You have sports and the arts. They're crucial, and we disrupted it all during the pandemic. We did. Right? We ripped asunder some really fundamental pieces of our social fabric. Yeah. And we're dealing with the ramifications of that. So
and the nation is.
Exactly.
We stopped the world because we didn't know what this disease was before us. And now we're trying to reignite it, and things aren't looking great.
No, we got a lot of sad, angry people that don't have the connections they had pre-pandemic. And again, 2019 in Portland wasn't perfect either. We can talk about some of those things, but we need to rebuild the social fabric broadly in each of our sub-communities, right? And that's table stakes. That means making sure schools never close down again unless there's a really, really good reason, and we open right back up. That again, it's the whole thing. The other side of it is economic opportunity, right? And giving young people of any race, particularly those marginalized, though, right? It is a path that they can see, that they can visualize, that they feel like they have something to lose when they, if they take high risk behavior. Yes. It's like, they're constantly reminding that. Also that, that they're loved and cared for in this community. I mean, again, part of the social fabric is giving young people connection and knowing that they have something to lose if they mess up.
Right.
But they've got a lot of people here that care about them,
Right.
and
so much to gain.
Yeah, exactly. There's an upside. Don't make a rash decision right this, in a moment of passion or a moment of fire that's going to destroy the rest of your life. You got
Absolutely.
too much, to play for here, and it's in. So those pieces have nothing to do with policing. That is a function of a healthy society that we.
And that's where you're aligned with the defund movement.
I actually agree with
we
them.
need to invest in these infrastructural things to stop the need for us to, have such a prominent presence of police force in order to deal with the crime or, the other things that are happening throughout the community that requires a police presence. Or maybe not police, maybe the what is it, the health advocates that they are deploying. They seem to be doing a pretty good job of working with folks who are having a mental health crisis and not bringing in guns to deal with someone who's having just a mental health kind of breakdown and crisis. Okay. So.
And there's a lot of other pieces on policing we can talk about, but I want to talk about, we cannot lose the fundamentals of getting people living in a healthy society, and I will talk a lot about policing and homelessness, and sometimes there's going to be some tough decisions we have to make on both of those things, but we cannot lose the fundamentals, and that's a livable society for all segments of the population.
Right on. So if I'm a police officer, or I'm thinking about becoming a police officer, or becoming a police officer in the city of Portland, if I'm considering voting for you, how will you treat, or how do you see the police? Like that division of human beings who show up every day and they run to the fire, they run to the chaos, they run to the crisis, and they put themselves on the line. And I want to say this, and be clear about my stance on police. I used to be the chief human resources officer for the city of Portland. I was HR for the police, right? I helped to hire cops throughout the police force, and I've seen amazing police officers, and I know that there are some police officers who are not amazing and who are not great human beings. And I personally believe that those are the folks who have to be held accountable to treating people disproportionately. But I want to call the police if a crisis happens. I want to call 911, and I want for them to show up and not shoot me because I'm black when they show up, right? Like I want both. I feel like both can happen concurrently. And so I want to know, how would you talk to a cop who's thinking about becoming a police officer in the city of Portland, and they're thinking about if they should vote for you or perhaps vote for someone else? How do you see them? How do you see the police force in the city?
Well, I think the first piece here is I will be fair, right? And so I think one of the challenges in the city of Portland and a lot of cities in the West in recent years is there is political expediency and a rash to judgment, right? The rhetoric that comes out of City Hall so quickly before we know the facts, right? Anytime there's an instance, or an alleged instance, you'll have someone get up there and start criticizing and throwing rhetorical bombs, and I'm not going to do that. I am a son of a judge, and with that comes a real belief that you've got to pause before you judge. You've got to let the facts come out. You've got to create space for process. So first and foremost, I'm going to be fair and not rush to judgment. We're going to respect process, and that it's never that doesn't sound sexy or exciting, but that is to create space for the facts to come out for us to really assess. The flip side of that is if you mess up, you'll be accountable in the city of Portland, and I'm not promising to take hands off on anybody stepping over the line of their responsibilities, particularly those holding the gun. So I'll treat you fairly. I won't rush to judge. I'll listen. I'll get down and what you're experiencing. I have talked to so many police officers, and since I kind of announced my candidacy and it looked like I had some viability as a candidate, and they, I will listen, but at the end of the day, you're still going to be accountable, and you have a really serious job, so it's a very important job. And there's going to be some higher standards for you sometimes than ordinary citizens.
Yep,
and
absolutely. You have a gun.
You have a gun. You can you make a mistake, and someone can die.
Someone can die.
But there are other pieces. I think police. I recognize that this city cannot get out of its crime challenges right now in the short term, and really forever without a functioning criminal justice system, and police are a key piece of that, right? So I recognize the necessity, the crucial role they play in society. They are absolutely crucial to a functioning city, and they'll be treated as such.
Right on.
But that doesn't mean they get to run from accountability either, right?
That's right.
We got to be able to do both. Another piece, I think I'd love to see more Portlanders join the Portland Police, right?
Right on.
I mean, this is an ongoing, long challenge for any urban police department. Where you recruit most of your talent, it often comes from the suburbs, but there is. Anytime someone's got skin in the game,
right.
when they're from the neighborhood,
right.
they understand it.
Community policing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't allow the dehumanization of both sides, right? And so and by that I mean the police are from somewhere else, and they're doing something to Portlanders or this neighborhood or this community, right? And the more we can bridge that gap, the better. So I think part of it in recruiting and talking to people that are, we'll do our best to get people from the city to consider that job, and make some active efforts to recruit.
So I want to ask the flip side of this question. This will be my last kind of policing question, but it's a big topic that's on the forefronts of a lot of people's minds. So I had you, kind of give a response to a person who's considering being a cop, or was currently a cop, who's thinking about, should I vote for you? So what would be your response to people in the community who are fearful of the police?
Well, one, police accountability has to be a cornerstone of any functioning society, right? I mean, that's just it is. And so if a police officer steps over the line, if they have patterns of behavior that don't fit an inclusive society, then we have to correct it. Yeah. And again, they'll go through a process, but, that has to be a cornerstone.
Absolutely.
And then part of that is understanding the neighborhoods. People will call that cultural competency. That's a combination of training and where we recruit folks, and gets back to, we need to recruit from the city. We need to recruit from the communities where there's under policing right now, where there's fear. And so I'd start with those two pieces. And at the end of the day, I think for us to get out of this crime challenge we're having right now, there's going to have to be a partnership between neighborhoods, police, and some of our other organizations. Yeah. And I think ongoing connecting the dots, communicating about the fears and the perceptions, getting on the table, I think that's part of cultural competency, right? I mean, that's actually, this is what you see and what you hear, but this is what I hear and what I see, and we need to put that on the table. Yep. And it's not just a one and done. That is an ongoing process and dialogue that needs to be part of going forward. Another piece that you allude to, though, the misconception about crime. Yes. And we talk about things like catalytic converters.
I'm telling you, the catalytic converter situation is a problem. I've had 3 that have been stolen from my vehicle in the last 17, 18 months. Very frustrating.
Very frustrating, rightfully so. Or when someone's vehicle that they used to go to work is stolen.
It's stolen.
And they're out. Those crimes are out of control.
They are out of control. I'm sorry. I'm a Pentecostal churchgoer, so call and response. Like, I am giving you a yes. Yeah. Okay. So when I repeat what you say, it's because yes, you get it. I had a chop shop maybe we live between MLK and Marine Drive. We had a chop shop right off of the Marine Drive exit for like 8 months. There were like hundreds of car parts and cars that were placed there, and people on different apps talking about their vehicles being stolen. They were going to work and they jumped out of the car, or they tried to fill up the tire on their car and someone jumped in it and stole it. Like, Oh my gosh.
I mean, they would drive right in through. They built up a big tent. You could drive right in. It was like.
Did you see that?
I did see it. I know exactly what
was
you're talking
creative.
about. It was but the reality of those crimes, right? So much of it is driven by drug addiction,
Right.
and we're seeing this with a lot of the property crimes.
Yep.
And the data right now is a majority of those committing those crimes are white.
That's right.
I mean, it's like that is a reality in Portland, Oregon. If you're talking about your property
That's right.
crimes, particularly the ones that are, feeding a drug habit, the perpetuators of that are largely white, right?
But when we say the word crime, a lot of people think that, the bias jumps in, that like an image will jump into your mind, and that image tends to look more like me, right, than the actual folks who are out there right now. So I wanted to really just highlight the fact that there are these, when we use this language of crime, sometimes when we use that language, people think that you're talking about over-policing black communities, over-policing brown communities, over-policing immigrant communities. But it's helpful to hear that you understand the nuances of some of the most pervasive crimes that are happening right now throughout the city of Portland as not being inflicted by people of color.
No, I mean, in Serilda, one of the pieces that just, and the whole discussion about homelessness, which we want to apply a lens and apply it in multiple settings to try and reinforce the narrative. And when you're talking about the unsheltered on the streets of Portland, it is disproportionately white, but majority white.
Right.
And it's like, and as is the crime that comes from feeding addiction.
Yes.
But we want to apply some, lens that hasn't been tested, and that is not the reality in that subset. One last thing on property crime. One of the things we're really, and this is really to communicate to Portlanders that are, that may be afraid to call the police or otherwise frustrated. I can't get justice, right? Like, it's the other piece that, this visceral feeling in the city of Portland. I cannot get justice.
That's right.
I'm a taxpayer. I work.
Yep.
And whether I'm poor, middle class, or rich, I cannot get equal treatment under the law right now in the city of Portland.
There's a lack of responsiveness, likely because there's not likely, because there's a understaffing that's happening right now. So there's not enough workforce to actually be responsive to the smaller crimes that are happening, but those small crimes can completely interrupt the fabric of a person's home. Right, and their career.
Right. I mean, again, that car that's stolen, you can't go to work. You can lose a job. I mean, it's one of the little things at a practical level we're looking at that we think might have some impact. We're looking at reestablishing a municipal court in the city of Portland to potentially really focus on property crimes.
Okay.
And that takes away our dependency on the county to resolve that. And they've got a lot of their own criminal justice challenges right now. And so the idea is you can only try misdemeanors. You can't do felonies there. But it's to try and do two real things.
Right.
One is to give Portlanders, again, a sense of justice. If someone wrongs my property, wrongs me, and we're going to get justice for that. And that's your vehicle stolen, that's your catalytic converter, that's your vandalism. And we don't have to wait for anyone else in the criminal justice system. The city of Portland can address that. And then the second is that it does, particularly for some of this drug-fed crime, right? That literally someone's stealing that catalytic converter, monetizing it, and then going and buying drugs, right? Like that is like, and it's not oversimplification, but it's a lot of white dudes from Idaho and Texas who are here in Portland engaging in that behavior and disrupting the cycle, right? I'm not going to charge you as a felon in the city of Portland. You can't do it in municipal court, but we're going to get you. If you're going to engage in that behavior, hopefully that leads to diversion, and we can get you into addiction services, or other mental illness treatment if that's what's at stake. But we're going to disrupt that cycle, anyways, that's one of the practical things we're looking hard at.
Well, we've segued naturally over to the homeless, houseless community, like a conversation about what's happening with houselessness throughout the Portland metro area. there's a lot going on there on the homeless front, and I'm just interested in what say you to solutions, like actual. I love to hear some ideas, right? Because we've been hearing a lot of people, a lot of perspective out there, but I am very interested in ideas for solutions and ways to partner with different folks to interrupt this cycle that is currently happening throughout the city of Portland, because we need something different and something better than what we've got right now. So what say you on this topic?
Well, I'm going to go real practical, real fast on this. So we got to get up shelter as quickly as possible. And that includes safe sleeping spaces, designated areas to sleep where we're saying it's okay to do it here, but you can't do it on sidewalks, you can't do it near schools, you can't park that RV in the right of way for months, right?
Right.
And the reason for that is the status quo. What's going on right now is both incredibly unfair to citizens of Portland,
right,
and is inhumane for a lot of the folks in that situation, right?
Yeah.
You know, sleeping on a sidewalk for weeks, months, or indefinitely is no way to live a life, and it's not fair to your neighbors. You know, it's both at the same time. It doesn't work for anybody. And that RV parked in that right-of-way dumping, you know, wherever it's going to dump.
Yeah.
You know, this is supposed to be a green city that cares about its environment, and we're tolerating that right now in a way that's just leading to little environmental damages throughout our community. The other piece is that, you know, we can't enforce existing law if we don't offer shelter, you know, and that's that is essentially the constraints the city of Portland operates under. And so it has been illegal in the city of Portland since 1981 to sleep in an unsanctioned campsite, right?
Okay.
That's old law. This is over 40 years. You cannot just camp on that sidewalk. That's been true in the city of Portland for at least on the books since 1981. But there are realities that we cannot enforce that law unless we offer alternative shelter. So we got to put that at the top of the list, right? To disrupt some of the really inhumane living conditions for those that are in unsheltered situations, and to actually allow us to enforce existing law. Another piece there, get folks in go ahead.
But does it have to be like a physical shelter, right? So there are nonprofits that are trying to rehab, you know, vacant motels or underperforming motels that'll get us a quicker turnaround. We've got some partners that we work with that are working on some of those initiatives. They need some funding, but like hundreds of beds can be made available in a series of months. But then folks are talking about building. It takes years to build an actual physical structure. We got problems today.
That's right.
You know, it's inhumane for someone to live on that sidewalk out there today, right? Not 2 years, 3 years from now. And so what are there any temporary solutions, right? So let's say until we get enough beds available, we are going to allow camping in these 9 particular areas that are not on sidewalks, right? But they are instead in more appropriate camping designated spots where we can also have restrooms that are managed, trash cans that can be, you know, that are collected on a regular cadence. Is there anything like that you've considered or thought about or that you think might be viable in the city of Portland? And I'm not leading you. I literally am just sitting at home frustrated, thinking thoughts, okay? But I want to just ask you that question.
So when I say shelter first, that's really where we're going, right? So that's it. So that is not waiting for permanent housing to improve the living situations of those on the streets. That's like tomorrow, finding designated places where they can at minimum sleep at night, ideally have access to sanitation and some sort of storage, right? And that is not on the sidewalk. So some of the big ideas, I think we have to put on the table the prospect of potentially big shelter locations. You know, Metro and what it's done with the Expo Center is, you know, they're trying to figure out a long-term use of that. They don't have a good long-term plan for it right now.
Not right now.
And there's a lot of space out there. So It's unfortunate the city hasn't been able to put a deal together there with this, with Metro. I think both parties kind of see it as it's excess real estate for Metro, and it's a lot of space we could park some RVs and put up some designated campsites for the city of Portland. We have to look big, and I think that's a shift from kind of what the status quo is doing, trying to wait for that permanent housing. And I don't mean to oversimplify it. I think there is some efforts underway to get shelter up and running, and you talk to county partners, and they'll highlight some, but it's not nearly fast enough, and it's too much priority on waiting towards the long-term housing. And so what I would say the shift is, let's make an incremental improvement as quickly as possible. Can we get them off a sidewalk into a designated place, Expo Center being one of them, other excess land for the city of Portland, and marginally improve things as quickly as possible. And then we're going to have to allocate some dollars from permanent housing to shelter, in my opinion, to get to deal with the crisis at hand. One last piece that I don't think the constraints the city of Portland is under from a legal perspective requires us to give an infinite amount of no barrier shelter. So, and just so your audience, is familiar, so no barrier is not requiring addiction services or mental illness, not requiring job training, no real rules, right? It's a place to sleep, but you can do anything you want. Well, the challenge with no barrier, for example, single moms with children that are on the street, they won't stay in a no barrier shelter. They don't feel safe for their kids, right? And so you hear this from a lot of seniors. This is the other challenging part of the homeless population right now. We've got a significant number of baby boomers that don't have sufficient resources to take care of shelter for the rest of their lives. They're just they're on Social Security, but it's not quite enough to really pay for housing. Those two segments, kind of the moms with children and seniors, those are the segments in particular that will not sleep in a no barrier shelter. So we've got to make sure we're making space to help those people whose needs are very different than the guy who moved here from Idaho, who's suffering from substance use disorder and refuses to engage in any kind of treatment, and to really service both of those. We have to offer some form of crisis sleeping environments, even from the guy from Idaho. But we can't put all our eggs in that basket. We cannot, put all of our resources towards solving his problem. We've got these other segments over here that need some, real help. And I make this point only that we can't make everything no barrier, right? We've got to create this space to protect. And this is the challenge right now in the unsheltered population, is there's a lot of crime within the unsheltered populations in unsanctioned camps. There's a lot of, so the other side of the coin on the homicide story we were talking about earlier, right? There's a lot of talk about the number of Black victims, which we need to talk about. The other big segment, though, where there's a substantial number of homicides is in unsanctioned camps. It is literally two homeless people engaging in something that leads to a death. And that drives away a lot of people who we as a society owe something to, the seniors, to the foster children just recently out on their own, to the single mom with kids. And they need some protection from the chaos that exists in the unsanctioned camps. So, long story short, we've got to offer both. And I am of the opinion that we can't just make it all about the guys on fire. I think we may get to the point where we're saying we will provide shelter in the city of Portland, but you have to engage in services, and that's the line in the sand. It's a little bit of tough love for this group. Hopefully it discourages further migration to the city of Portland, who just come here for a lax, lifestyle on, after Measure 110. But it's also to protect a whole segment of the population that needs protection from the chaos that exists in unsanctioned camps. And some rules associated with it goes a long way.
I so want to unpack Measure 110. We can't. But I so want to unpack that. Okay. So I want to transition,
okay.
And we only have a couple more transitions.
Okay.
Your time is really important. I want to make sure I hit all the things that are important to people that I talk to every single day. And that as we segue from kind of houselessness, I want to now talk about economic recovery, right? Revitalization of the city of Portland. What's your vision for economic recovery and revitalization throughout the city, and where do you see partnerships, the potential for partnerships to happen? Where do you see those existing right now?
Yeah, I know, that's an awesome question. So first of all, we have to stabilize, right? So and we can't escape the crime and homeless challenges when we talk about the fun stuff, which is rebuilding, because our status quo right now is driving away private capital.
It is.
Companies don't want to headquarter here. If they do, they want to do it in the suburbs.
Right.
That is directly a result of homelessness and crime. We've never been a particularly pro-business city. Like, the fees have always been high. The bureaucracy's always been high. And I'll get to those things in a second and what we might do to address those. But otherwise, this was a place that a lot of people wanted to live, and you could attract good talent in the city of Portland, relatively speaking. There's some segments where it was harder to attract talent, but in general, people wanted to live here. And that was an economic advantage, right? I mean, that was the thing that the city of Portland had done really well. We solved livability. That made it easy for some companies to headquarter here to attract talent. Well, that's all in jeopardy right now. So we've got to stabilize that. So that's one. We talked a lot about that subject, so I won't belabor it, but it's and then two, I think we don't really have an economic development wing of the city of Portland anymore. Prosper Portland, in its former iterations had more explicit mandate there. In its current manifestation, you don't quite see the same, vigor in pure economic development and attracting capital. And I think we have to engage on that, and that means doing some road shows. That means, really outreach to various industries to show them what Portland has to offer. And we still do, by the way, even though we have these crises on our streets, this is still the economic engine of the state, and we still have this phenomenal agriculture. We've got amazing natural resources. We have cheap energy. We have a highly educated workforce, and we have some great technology companies all in the city of Portland or in our metro area. These are assets to sell. These are assets to attract businesses to invest here, and we've got to make that, tell that story and get that narrative out again. But the third piece that we've gone through a crisis. We're still kind of living that crisis right now in the city of Portland, and a lot of cities have gone through this. And you deal a lot with workforce change, and my little technology company, part of what we do is sell remote work and how you do it, right? So we're all adjusting to this new reality and optimizing it. That creates some both unique challenges and opportunities for a city like Portland with a great, historically a great urban core. Well, more people can work remote. What are we going to do about that? Some of them, that's all they want to do, right? I mean, and
a large faction of the workforce.
And so we're going to, this is a real risk. This is a real challenge for the city of Portland that has built all this infrastructure to bring people downtown, and many fewer workers want to be downtown, both temporarily and some potentially permanently. So while that's a risk, we also have this legacy of livability that's really under siege right now, but we got livability kind of right for a while. And so emerging from 2022, I think we have to make space for the vision. What does post-pandemic Portland look like, right? I mean, it's like, that is, we've got to create that space as a city, engaging with stakeholders at all levels, and that transcends government. I mean, that's engaging with the community, the various business communities. I say various business communities because people talk like it's homogenized business community. So it's like, you got East Side, you got West Side, you got Latino, you got Black, you got Asian. I mean, they're very different subsets of the business community, but bringing them in, engaging, much less the different industries, right? Like it's and being a part of that visioning. Also getting back to some of the arts and our cultural organizations and how we engage in what we can do going, as we emerge from all of this.
Right.
And I don't pretend to know all the answers on that. That's the whole point. We just need to create the space where we can build that common vision.
Well, who do you think you would partner with to start having those conversations and get a deeper understanding? I mean, you bring up Prosper Portland. Prosper Portland has shifted pretty significantly because the days of PDC, right, led to disproportionate displacement of Black and brown people. But specifically in the Black community, we were removed. Our wealth was removed unceremoniously, and so Prosper needed to pivot. Prosper needed to evolve and change, and their funding structure also evolved and changed. I know a little bit about Prosper because I used to be their VP of HR before I went to the city. And so, Prosper has a special place in my heart because they have applied an equity lens to everything that they're doing from an economic development standpoint. And I don't think they get as much credit for the work that they are doing on that front, but I also don't think they have the same kind of money that they had when they didn't care about those stakeholders. Yeah. And so, what kind of partnerships do you think you can establish to move the dial on economic recovery, business rejuvenation for the city of Portland?
Yeah, I mean, it's the partnering is going to be with. I look at some of the wonderful cultural organizations, and we have a great movie industry in the city of Portland.
We do.
Nobody talks about it, but it's like until they see a Portland neighborhood in a show they're watching.
That's right. That came from somewhere. There's a film division, department that is actually fueling that for the state of Oregon. But yeah.
And it pays a lot of family wage jobs.
It sure does.
And it's doing a lot of really interesting things on equity and inclusion. Right. I mean, they are doing some of the work. And
they are.
And so. Finding those gems, right?
Yeah.
And and you talk about downtown, you cannot talk about downtown without some discussion of the arts, right? That's been a big piece there, and it attracts people, it brings them in.
And this is a creative city.
Without question. And the other one that nobody talks about, or we sort of celebrate it without having done much work, is the music industry.
Right.
We have a wonderful, diverse, actually, music industry in the city of Portland, and how, all those people need to be a part of that dialogue. And then on the, just some of the folks that block and tackle and hire and build in the city. I mean, we've got some wonderful technology companies. We've got some incredible innovators in the food industry, and that's directly related to
the food here. I mean, you travel anywhere in the country, I feel like Portland can go toe for toe with some of the best culinary arts spaces in the nation. Right? We gotta get that booming again. I mean, do you just how many businesses went out of how many restaurants went out of business?
It's so depressing. It's
restaurants.
so many. It's so depressing. I mean, and they're still struggling with some of the things that we've been talking about in terms of crime and homelessness. The impact on our entrepreneurs, our creators in the restaurant space has been brutal. And so I think, but bringing them to the table on the visioning, I think is crucial, because we still have some unique aspects in Portland that put us in a really good place there.
For recovery.
And for, and again, it's not going back to 2019. We're going to build something new and hopefully better,
That's right.
and that can more inclusive, right? I mean, we can do all of those, and but we got to make the space for the work. We got to stabilize a little bit. We got to stop the fire in the house, but make the space for building something better.
Post-pandemic Portland. Hashtag that.
Got that?
Right, you got that? Okay, so my last question for you today. You've given me so much of your time and so much of your perspective on how you plan to lead. I appreciate you for that. My last question for you is, why should people vote for you right now in this moment?
Thank you. Well, we've got a lot of tough challenges, and this is a city I love. This is a city that my wife and I chose to raise our children in. It's the only one they've ever known. I am a father in the city. I am a grandson of the city. And so at a real basic level, I've got skin in the game. I know what we're fighting for. I've seen Portland at its best. I'm seeing it, kind of up against the ropes right now. And I want to bring it back to something new and beautiful. And I also want to work to bring us together. There's so much anger and intensity right now, and it's trying to find a way to pull us all in to a more positive Portland for the future. And I've led big organizations, I've led small organizations in both the for-profit, nonprofit world. I think all of those things are going to be helpful here. Those are a lifetime of building some skills up. They're going to help. But at the end of the day, it's knowing what we're fighting for. It's a city that we want our kids to return to. It's a city that our parents will be safe in. And I look forward to partnering with you all on it. Thank you.
Right on. Well, that's word on the street. Rene Gonzalez is running for city commissioner, and he spent some time with us talking about his vision for leading the city, leading the workplace and the workforce, and how we're going to get out of this moment that we're in. And we can get out of this moment, and I'm excited for it. So again, thanks for watching Word on the Street, and I'll see you next time.